Dobro. Izvolite. Dobro večer. Hvala što ste došli u tako velikom broju, nisam iskreno očekivao, tako malo sam iznenađen. Dobro, došli ste na tribinu koja će se zapravo održavati na engleskom jeziku, to moram odmah upozoriti, pisalo je i u najavama. A zbog našeg gosta koji dolazi iz Italije, ne govori naš jezik, pa smo nekako zaključili u organizaciji da je najlakše da razgovaramo na engleskom. Dakle, ovo se organizira novo osnovani Centar za anarhističke studije, to je novo reosnovani, recimo, koji je svojevremeno već bio dio ovoga mreže anarcho-sindikalista, onda je Centar za studije malo pao u nekakvu neaktivnost, neko vrijeme, sad smo ga odlučili opet reaktivirati kao samostalnu organizaciju. I ovo nam je prvi javni događaj, nadamo se da će biti još toga, mislim, znamo da će biti, nadamo se da će biti još ovakvog interesa. Pa bit će još nekakvih aktivnosti dok se stvari malo uhodaju. Još imamo neke administrativne stvari za odraditi prije nego sve krene kako treba. Sad bih ja pomalo prešao na engleski jezik, ne bih htio duljiti s ovim. Da pređemo odmah na temu, tako da što prije počnemo da poslije možemo i diskutirati. So I will turn to English now, and yes, so the topic today is like it's basically the anarchists' practices and standpoints regarding wars and the struggle against wars. So how we struggle against wars today and through history, basically. So because there is a tradition about it. It is significant that we are gathered here to discuss struggles against war and militarism on the second anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is today. And a careful listener, I think, could have been able to hear the rumors of war even before this invasion. For not only for the fact that the invasion is really just a second phase of an ongoing war in Ukraine since 2014, actually, but also in the militaristic language employed by politicians and the ruling class worldwide during the pandemic years, and even before that, in the unadvertised increase in military spending across Europe, which is still going on. And even before that, as the NATO kept expanding in the Balkan region, leaving Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia and Kosovo the only not yet members of this military alliance in the Balkans. They are also going to be very probably. And this NATO expansion on the Balkans, in turn, is the result of wars across ex-Yugoslavia during the whole last decade of the 20th century, which is the conveniently forgotten recent war in Europe on European soil. So media have forgotten all about it in the West. So the Russian invasion in Ukraine, however, was a crucial moment because it partly introduced in the European public discourse, again, a bloc division of the world, atomic fear, and the fear of a global military escalation that might once again endanger the European centers of power. This fear and the hatred it causes are essential for the justification of proxy wars against the Russian threat or against Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip, for the justification of the reintroduction of obligatory military service that was suggested, if not yet effected, in many European countries, and for the justification of the increasing military production and spending that has to be put to use to be justified. Ultimately, of course, it is the common people, the working class, that pays the actual price of all of this. With increased military spendings behind the front, we keep lacking, for example, resources for public health and education services. We have to pay ever more to get even the basic services, which makes them ever less and less accessible. It is not by accident that the payment system for state and public services in Croatia that was introduced this week by the Croatian government favors the army, police, and the judiciary system, while it disfavors education, science, and scholarship. At the front, on the other hand, it is the working class that gets recruited and sent to the slaughter. We've never seen Putin or Zelensky actually risking their lives at the front line. At the same time, all civil and labor rights are suspended. All civil and labor action get criminalized, while capitalists, industrialists get all the protection needed to keep them exploiting labor and nature. Whoever wins the war, we might see some new names and faces coming under the spotlight, but the basic class configuration of the economy and society will not be changed. War is nothing but one of the most violent forms of oppression and exploitation. This is why anarchists encourage and support rebellion against everything military, whether in the form of desertion or mutiny, sabotage, protest, or strike on either side of the front. The anarchists see that all around the world, the interests of the oppressed and exploited classes are opposite to those of the bourgeoisie and the ruling class. And so the oppressed and exploited should stand in solidarity with each other and unite internationally in the struggle for their own interest against any ruling class anywhere in the world. The basic principles and questions that were raised by the likes of Enrico Malatesta, Emma Goldman, Alexander Shapiro, and others in the International Anarchist Anti-War Manifesto of 1915 are, sadly, all still entirely actual. That's why, with the advent of the Russian invasion in Ukraine and all the potential danger that it brings, the Italian Anarchist Federation has proposed a new and updated anarchist manifesto against the war. And I will let Federico tell you more about it.
Okay, thank you very much, Franco. Thanks everybody for coming. So I am really sorry that we have to accommodate to discuss in English this evening, but as we are internationalists, I think that we try our best to mutually understand and communicate. And as I don't speak Croatian, clearly I have this resource of English, hoping that it is okay for you. Thanks again for the comrades here of the Anarchist Studies Center for this invitation. We have presented this manifesto in several international venues, but I think that maybe before it can be useful is I quickly explain just basically what is the Italian Anarchist Federation. So the Italian Anarchist Federation, FAI, the acronym, was founded in 1945 based on an experience that came from the anti-fascist resistance of 1943-1945 after something like 20 years of clandestine struggle against the regime of Mussolini, which also contributed to international and transnational anarchist circuits, because several of the former Italian activists in anarchism were exiled in other European countries, especially in France, someone in South America. Many fought in the anti-fascist struggle of 36-39 in Spain, which is a key event in the history of anarchism for the revolutionary accomplishments of that year. So there is a continuity in this experience of the Italian Anarchist Federation with this story and with the former story of social and organized anarchism dating back to the Saint-Imier Congress of 1872. We had this last summer an international event in Saint-Imier in Switzerland for the anniversary of this event. And the organizational structure of the federation was inherited by the Italian Anarchist Union, founded in 1920 and then disbanded by fascism, that was inspired, and as FAI is still inspired, by the thought and praxis of Enrico Malatesta, already quoted by Franco, and especially from a document which is called Anarchist Program, that was written by Malatesta and is still available in several languages in our website. So first, this stresses the importance for anarchism of being organized, in the sense that anarchist organization, federalist organization, so intended as organization for below, is for us a guarantee of freedom and equality within the organization, following the principle of the coherence between theory and praxis that also informs our positions about wars and about current affairs, because we think that you can foster an agenda of freedom only through free and consistent practices. So organization without leaders, without bureaucrats, with clear and collective mandates, and each mandate strictly controlled by the assembly. A key point for us is, as I said, internationalism, because in 1968 the Italian Anarchist Federation, together with the Iberian Federation and the French-speaking Federation, the Bulgarian Federation and others, founded the International of Anarchist Federations. You can find in the website of the International of Anarchist Federation our statements against war, for instance, that account for what is exactly one of the key points for us to first struggle against the culture of war, that is the practice of internationalism and of international solidarity, also through this international. Just to conclude on the 5 point, just to let you know that we have some dozens of groups and local federations in Italy. We have a weekly journal that is called Umanità Nova, and that is published since 1920, so the most ancient journal of the social movements in Italy. We have a publishing house, Zero in Condotta. We have a historical archive, and our groups are especially committed in social work through what is called in Italy the alternative syndicalism or unionism, so the movement of the combative trade unions refusing the official unions compromised with the government, and a series of endeavor such as you may have heard of the struggles against the TAV, the high-speed train between the Piedmont and France, so against environmental devastation, against military bases. We are active in local movements against patriarchy, against discrimination, in solidarity with migrants, and several local activities depending on the groups. So, as for the anti-militarist point, the point of our opposition to wars, as Franco noted, there is an anniversary today, which is the anniversary of the disgraceful and criminal invasion of Ukraine by the army of the Russian Federation, and there are other conflicts that are quite frequently discussed in the news, such as the Gaza conflict. So, but first, we should not forget that these are, in this moment, the most famous conflicts. But according to several observatories on human rights and on civil victims of war, there are several dozens of armed conflicts. Someone says almost 100 in this moment in several countries. For instance, there are a lot of these kind of conflicts in Africa, Sudan, Central Africa, West Africa, that are almost unknown in the West, in Europe, probably because they make less impression, being more far away in relation to others. But this should not make us forget the globality of the problem of war and the intersection between the state of war and the capitalist and state system that we live internationally, because war is strictly connected with capitalism, is strictly connected with patriarchy, especially in the war culture. It is strictly connected with exploitation. So, as a federation, we identified anti-militarism as one of our strategic points, even before, for instance, the formal start of the war in Ukraine a couple of years ago. Okay, one can also say that war in Ukraine was ongoing since 2014, etc. But in any case, what I wanted to say is that it was in the autumn of 2021 that we promoted, together with other anarchist groups that are not part of the federation, with some of these alternative union and with some pacifist group, etc. So with a wider front, even if it is not a good, a so good word, we promoted a coordination which is called Anti-Militarist Assembly. So the first points of this anti-militarist assembly were to coordinate struggles against, for instance, military bases. There are a lot of military bases in Italy, NATO bases, American bases, Italian bases, etc., with everything it involves in terms of danger for the population, in terms of environmental devastation, in terms of spreading of a culture of war and culture of death. So this is something in which our comrades are active, we can say, from Sicily to the extreme north, Friuli, Aviano, etc. Another point was the opposition to military expenditure of the state, and especially the opposition to the trade and production of weapons, because weapons are instruments of death, and we are also really concerned by the rhetoric of war, the war propaganda to which we are assisting, especially in the last few years, passing the idea that producing weapons and increasing military expenditure is something good because we are the good guys, we have the bad enemy, etc. We say no, producing weapons is always something that is bad and is detrimental to the condition of working classes that have an instrument in blocking this production and trading for making something against war and against capitalism. Another point of the anti-militarist assembly was the opposition to the neo-colonial military missions abroad of the Italian army, because like other former colonialist countries like France, Italy is committed since several years in North Africa and several other theaters, bringing the rhetorics of making our interests, etc., while we don't identify any of the interests of working class and oppressed people in this kind of national interest brought up militaristically. Then, when the conflict in Ukraine started, we had already quite clear ideas, and we started the mobilization first, starting from our situation, our real life in a country that is colonized effectively by the United States since the end of the Second World War, a country which is a member of NATO, a country in which a strong war propaganda immediately arose to send weapons to the Ukrainian conflicts, to the detriment of social expenditure and to the conditions of people. So we first started to oppose this war propaganda first in the all possible media of communication and this social expenditure through the instrument that we had to try to fight former conflicts together with other groups, especially the alternative unions. That is the general strike. General strike promoted by alternative unions following a tradition that started with the two Iraq wars in 1999 and 2003, or the war in Kosovo in 1999. In all of these wars, Italy was involved. So we promoted also 3 of these strikes in May 2022, December 2022, and the last one in October 2023. So general strikes against the war and against war economy, because what is crucial for us is linking anti-militarism to class consciousness and to class struggle, because war and militarism are something that involves the dominating classes, the national bourgeoisie, and has nothing to do with the interest of exploited people. For instance, in this discussion, we also questioned the idea of one people, the very national or nationalistic idea of people, because the people is an interclass concept. We don't recognize the legitimacy of one nation or one generic people. We recognize the international solidarity among oppressed classes. And it is for that we considered first what is our tradition and what are also the basic concepts, the basic notions that coming from people like Malatesta and others that are too much neglected today but should be more known, helps us to orient our action when something happens which requires choices, which requires also courageous positions. So, against war, Malatesta, as Franko already said, claimed that there is no room for anarchism taking part in or taking side in a conflict between states or imperial blocs, between state armies, because for anarchism, struggle is struggle against the oppressed classes, not against the poor person of another nation, of another country with another uniform. This is a political and strategic problem of international class solidarity, but it is also an ethical problem, because in the sense of Malatesta, anarchism refuses violence unless it is a necessity of self-defense against oppression, direct oppression. So again, we are in the idea of the consistency between means and ends. So what we support in the case of war, in the case of the war in Ukraine, like in the case of the war in Gaza, and like in the case of all other conflicts between states and armies, what we support are the victims, the civil victims, and the refugee, the people who are suffering, and the people who refuses, deserters, objectors. So everybody who refuses the logic of wars, refuses the logic of wearing an uniform, and refusing the logics of killing other poor people. And it is what we were committed to do through our international contacts and international networks, supporting everybody who refuses from both sides of war, and everybody who is a victim from both sides of war, because we are against any form of nationalism. We are for international solidarity, and we believe that there is no just war. There is not a right of war or a crime of war, because war is always a crime, and war should be refused by the working classes and by everybody on political and ethical grounds. A point that is especially discussed in the last few months is our critique to the very idea of territorial sovereignty. Territorial sovereignty, especially state-exclusive territorial sovereignty, means that there are some immaterial entities called linear boundaries which acquire materiality and force as far as they exclude someone. They exclude the stranger, they exclude the migrant, they exclude different people. And what is the evil in most of the conflicts that are fought today, from Ukraine to Gaza to other situations, is that it seems that people should kill or be killed for conquering of 1 meter or 2 meters of this territorial sovereignty. So we think that this idea of sovereignty, of bounded territories with the exclusive exercise of power by one state is not a solution, is not adequate. Because we are historically in favor of federalist solution of self-government from below, as it was experienced during the Spain Revolution. On this, with all the problems and contradictions that can exist, it was tried more recently with the democratic confederalism in northern Syria. So, territorial solutions that go beyond the sovereignty of the state. and imply mutual solidarity between different ethnicity and different people, because oppressed people of different nationality should express brotherhood and sisterhood rather than war. Then it results clear for that, for instance, that if we take the Israeli Palestinian conflict in this period, we don't believe that the solution are the two states. The solution is a completely different model. We know that it is difficult, but we know also that the state, the national state, with exclusive territorial sovereignty, has failed as a geopolitical entity. And it is up to us, up to the exploited and oppressed people, to build something different. So, on the one hand, we are opposed to all armies and the governments that lead this army. We condemn the genocide perpetrated by Israel on the Gaza population, but we cannot support organizations of Islamic fanatics like Hamas, and we cannot support a state solution. We support can support a federalist solution. Likewise, in the case of the Russian-Ukrainian conflicts, we condemn the criminal invasion of Putin in a very clear manner, but we cannot side with NATO, and we cannot endorse other states and other imperial blocs fighting in this side. Our solution is the solution from below, supporting the victims, supporting people who refuses, and this is our strategy against war, making clearly what we can do starting from our position, from the place where we live, which meant basically so far promoting this workers' mobilization and promoting the international network in solidarity with deserters, objectors, etc. And mainly, for some aspects importantly, fighting daily against the very culture of war, for bringing different ideas and different value. If you want to read our document, which circulated starting from 1.5 years ago, it is titled "For a New Anarchist Manifesto Against the War." It is available in a dozen of languages, also in Croatian, thanks to Franko, who kindly translated the document. We presented it in several international meetings in Saint-Imier, in South America also, so it is a document for debate in which we basically express the ideas that I tried to sketch now. So I think that I have already spoken enough. Maybe too much, so maybe it is better to shift to discussion. Thanks.
So yes, the next minutes, I don't know how long it takes, but it will are dedicated to the discussion. So if anyone has anything to ask or to comment, to start up some discussion regarding what Federico said here, you're welcome. So is there anyone wanting to ask something? Or to comment something? Okay, there is Ferretti.
Thank you very much for your introduction.
Thank you very much. The first question could be, because it is very often discussed among the anarchists of different kinds, the distinction between anti-militarism and pacifism. These are two concepts, two traditions, which are interconnected somehow. However, some insist upon the sharp distinction between these two concepts.
May we take 2 or 3?
Okay, if there is, are there any more questions for the moment?
Hello. Thank you. Your introduction was certainly interesting, but I'm very confused on in what manner do you plan to carry out that resistance from below? Because you mentioned conflicts, as you call them, in Palestine, which I wouldn't call a conflict, but a settler colonial project by an Israeli state, which oppresses and genocides the Palestinian people. And you also mentioned Hamas, which obviously is problematic because of Islamic fundamentalism, but despite that, it carries out armed resistance against colonialism, which I would hope that any kind of leftist, anti-capitalist organizations, such as yours, for example, should support. That's it. Thank you.
Anyone else?
So you can answer questions.
Okay, so I will start with these two. They are both very interesting questions. Thanks for that. So also because something interesting is how we use words in both cases. So as for instance, anti-militarism and pacifism are definitions that can be understood in several ways. So for instance, there are people claiming some kind of anti-militarism in which I would not absolutely recognize my idea, my take. So, and the idea that I think is quite agreed in my federation is that we mean by anti-militarism what Enrico Malatesta meant. So, quoting Malatesta, he said something like, between quotes, anti-militarism means that the military service is, Malatesta said, an abominable job, and that one individual should not fight but for the social revolution. So anti-militarism is refuse of war on class struggle basis and also on ethical grounds. While pacifism is something that it is associated with broader movements that not necessarily include a class dimension. There is a bourgeois pacifism, there were several kinds of pacifism, but in our experience, and when I mentioned the general strikes, the anti-military assembly, etc., these were all events, endeavor in which we variously sided with some other pacifist groups. So not all the possible pacifists, but on some specific endeavors, there was the possibility to side with different people, different groups, pacifist groups which with a very different background than ours. In some cases, even some Catholic-inspired pacifist groups, because there are anyway people with a certain kind of coherence in this pacifism intended as principled ethical opposition to war, to the objection to the military service, etc., that we consider respectable and that we can side with in certain cases. About the...
May I just add something?
Yeah.
Just for a moment. Not rather a technical thing, because if you have questions while we are speaking here, you can raise your hand. I will note down so you can speak later. And another thing regarding maybe the difference between pacifism and anti-militarism, there is also, I mean, because there also inside the anarchist movement, there is a pacifist current, like in our, we were mentioning it on our website, like Leo Tolstoy, which was one of the starters of the anarchist pacifist current, and it's the difference basically is that not every, I mean, we are all every anarchism is anti-militarist, but not every anarchism is pacifism. Is pacifist because, as Federico said before, one of the most famous episodes in anarchist history was, for example, the Spanish Revolution, in which there were armed groups, militias, fighting in the war against the fascist coup, and they were also carrying on a revolution, and the militias were organized in a non-militaristic way. They were organized in assemblies and without the usual military hierarchy. And that's a rather important point here.
Which is only the most famous example.
That's only the most famous example.
However, in Ukraine, Makhnovщина, Nestor Makhno, and the other anarchist groups around the world fought their anarchist struggle in a non-pacifist manner, which was actually anti-militarist if it is the definition of anti-militarism. Yes. However, it is not pacifist at all. But you said already in Malatesta we can find, if necessary, the pacifist could be, so to say, temporarily put aside, so to say.
I'd say that there are occasions on which it's more like question of tactics or strategy. Sometimes it's better to act in a non-violent way, in a non-violent struggle, and sometimes, like the people get forced basically to defend themselves even by taking arms. But that's a different.
But that's the topic of the second question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Anyway, I think that the examples that you presented, Makhnovщина, anarchist militias in Spain, etc. I may add the 43-45 resistance in Italy, etc. I think personally they were all broadly coherent with the optic of Malatesta, because that kind of fight was not militaristic in the sense that they did not depend to a state army or an imperial bloc. They were autonomous expression of struggle and resistance. On the second question, you are right in pointing on the ambiguity of the word conflict. Yes, because in fact, if we want to be clear, maybe we can use conflict for class conflict and in the case of Ukraine, Gaza, etc., we can use war. And clearly, in the case of Gaza, there is also a genocide ongoing, as you say, by this logic of settler colonialism. Until here, I think that we completely agree. The point in which I don't actually agree is that we cannot really support people like Hamas because of the principle of the coherence between the means and the ends. So if you want to foster an agenda of justice, of freedom, of equality, or anything that we consider ethical values, you cannot really support reactionary movements. And especially in the case of anarchists, not a religious, a movement of religious fanaticists, also because the idea of freedom from institutional religions, fanaticism, etc., is really one of the key points. So the problem and also the difficulty is to adopt means that are coherent with the ends. And in this case, we were in all the demonstrations against Israel genocide, etc. But we cannot support organizations or solutions that are incoherent with our views. We can support people escaping from the massacre, escaping from the scenario. We circulated also documents of people in Gaza sick with both Hamas and with Israel. And likewise, we, as I said, we criticize the idea of the two states because we think that it is not the solution. And we, in past years, there is also in Israel a movement of objection, the refusnik. And in past years, we also supported internationally a collective that was called Anarchists Against the Wall, who were objectors, most from the Israeli side, trying connection with people on the other side to refuse the logic of the mutual, of the logic of war between these two peoples, because as I said, the problem is not the people as a nation, but the people as oppressed people beyond nations. Then, okay, if there is a disagreement, there is a disagreement, but we cannot really support options that are so incompatible with our views for the principle of the coherence between means and ends. So.
There was someone there.
Thank you. I have a question regarding the Ukrainian conflict. Since you said that as anarchists really shouldn't support either side of this conflict, don't you think that by not supporting Ukraine, by Russia invading Ukraine and occupying it, it would treat its people as second-class citizens, and thus they would be well worse than in the Ukrainian state like it is today? Don't you think that by supporting Ukraine and sending military and financial aid, we would stop that from happening, thus supporting the Ukrainian people, not just the state, in this war? Thank you.
We may take some other.
If anyone wants to ask. it was just him for now. Okay.
I just have a small question about this situation in Gaza. We always talk about our perspective. Oh, sorry. So I will repeat. So we always talk about situation in Gaza from our European perspective, from the West perspective, let's say, and okay, our position is right. We are from moral perspective and from ideological perspective, but what is a recipe for the anarchists in Gaza? What can they do from their place in the environment of apartheid and destruction? So it's easy for us to say we just support the victims, but it's necessary to stop these things, not just support and victims. So this is my question basically. What's the right position for the anarchists, Palestinian anarchists in Gaza? How can they act in this moment if they can't support Hamas and other Islamistic groups? How can they make some resist the Israel occupation practically and genocide in the end? Thank you.
Try to respond. Yeah, but I think that there are matters that are connected. So as for Ukraine, I completely understand the point. It is something that it is always said in these discussions. But the problem is, are we really sure that fighting this war in the sense of fostering continually this conflict, sending weapons until, I don't know, until a nuclear conflict, until a definitive clash between Russia and NATO, etc., is really better for them and for us? Then, a matter that I think it is also valid for the following question is that we are not pretending to tell people what they have to do, and we are not pretending to propose recipes for everything. But what we can do in our situation is to support victims and people who refuses. For all the reminders, we think that from our position of a movement that is a movement from below, we are not represented in parliaments and governments, also because we don't want to be. For what is our positionality and our reach, this is the strategy and this is the thing to say, because all the reminder justifying the fact that the war continues is something depending on big geopolitical moves that we don't control. The only chance that we have to control something from below is to spread networks of solidarity, is to spread different ideas, is to spread the culture of war. Otherwise, we are simply within the culture of war approving what exists. Then I respect all the single choices of the people on the countries in war, on the battlegrounds, those who decided to join the army, etc., for their reasons. But this is human solidarity. It is not a political endorsement. It is not our perspective. Also, because yes, there are peoples in this struggle suffering, but we are not sure that continuing the war will limit this suffering. So what we foster is refusing the culture of war. Then, as for Gaza, the matter is similar. So we don't say to people on the ground what they should or should not do. We try to identify and to support what we think is useful in the perspective of building something different from below. Now the problem is that there is no organized anarchist movement in Palestine. And if this movement existed, it is not Italian FI who tells them what they should do, obviously. But what we can do, and we try to do, is supporting people who want to have another kind of life and struggle in our country, in our situation, to counter the intervention of for instance, of in the case of Israel, indirect intervention of the Italian government, which sells weapons to Israel, like to a lot of other fighting governments in the world. So this is obviously one of the things that can be made in Italy, in Croatia, and elsewhere. I hope it was okay.
Thank you for the talk so far. One thing that's coming to mind when talking about the war/conflict, however we want to agree on calling it, in or between Ukraine and Russia is there were actions, for example, from another really, I would call it autocratic state, which is neighboring Ukraine, it's Belarus, and some anarchist groups there were blowing up railways, so Russian military equipment couldn't reach the Ukrainian border or the front line. Another thing that is being done in Russia is openly calling for desertion in the conflict. And there are a lot of people actually escaping Ukraine because of the mandatory military involvement of aged males for now. More than 4,000 people are leaving the country every week or across many different borders. So one way, it's difficult to talk about it from a Croatian perspective. There is not much we as individuals can do on the front lines. But a thing to keep in mind is that feeding weapons into the war machine is difficult to call it helping either one side or the other side. The only way helping those people is to stop the killing, and you will not stop the killing by sending in more weapons. You could help the people in Ukraine and in Russia by advocating or having solidarity with comrades from Russia who are actively trying to sabotage the Russian war machine, who are actively trying to overthrow the Russian state as a structure, who are openly advocating against not only Putin, but against Russian nationalism and imperialism as a whole. So there are many different approaches in which we could help the people in Ukraine specifically, if we are talking about Ukraine. And I agree on the point with Gaza and Hamas. It is a difficult position, and it's easy to slip into I would call it, how would I call it? I would call it fetishizing anti-colonial resistance, just because it is anti-colonial, and in a way, it is understandable that we are supporting anti-oppression, but supporting anti-oppression that's going to result in the oppression of other groups of people is not really getting us anywhere on a global and a global scale and in a long-term fashion, in my opinion. So.
For low blood pressure reasons, I'm going to stay seated, but first one is a watching recommendation and another one is a question. For the occupied Gaza situation, there was recently a talk, I think, in California. It was sort of a talk like this currently, and there's a video of it on Facebook from a Facebook page called Sunset Labs. The talk was called No State Solution, and in the talk there's an Israeli historian and political theorist as well as a Palestinian sociologist, so maybe that will be of help in like thinking of kind of like native solutions. And I'm here. Hi. As for the question, I think this is a question that's not only related to your kind of like political and social praxis, but also something that's been in my mind lately. I'm just like interested in what is your macro level political praxis in fighting against the cultural war, as you call it, because I've been having talks with my friends and my partner recently about, especially like being a man in a patriarchal world, and we see a lot of like warmongering, I think, lately in the media, like talks about the potential of a World War III if like Trump comes to power in the US in November, and then also a lot of warmongering in EU media suggesting that the EU has to put up a lot of defense and put more money into NATO and defense resources, etc. If Trump were to block the Article number 5, right, of the NATO treaty, and then how do we even escape that that kind of potential of being sucked into the war machine? And I guess, like on one level, I see that necessity, I guess. I mean, not necessity, but like the political power of the traditional like Marxist path of like, okay, having to go to like revolutionary war to fight against it, but then on the other side, like, what the fuck are we talking about? You're fighting against drones, right? You're not really having this kind of like partisan position that was possible maybe like in the middle of the 20th century. So there's not really like, I think at least, there's not really a technical position of being able to go into a revolutionary war, but apart from opposition and this kind of like symbolical, theoretical kind of opposition to the culture, I guess I see the necessity, of course, your federation has in mind the necessity of unionizing and coming together, and I know that it's not very anarchist, in trying to make one size fits all theory, but yeah, I just suppose like I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts about a macro level praxis, maybe not on a global scale, but at least on a privileged European scale? Thanks.
Good question. Just a note on the intervention about circuits making anti-war sabotage and calling to desertion within Russia, for instance. This is exactly what we call refusal, and clearly more significant if it comes from people living in the nations that are in war and obviously not speaking from outside. The matter, as you guess, is quite sensitive because in these theaters, not only Russia but also in Ukraine, people against the respective government risks a lot for their activities. But for instance, in case of Russia, there is the Anarchist Black Cross of Moscow, which has a web page, an email contact, etc., which looks after solidarity to political prisoners, etc. So this is a contact that can be shared on this side. There are also some situations on similar position than ours within Ukraine, and it is an anarchist group called Assembly in Kharkiv that has a rubric in English within the portal libcom. But if you search for libcom Assembly Kharkiv, they send periodically reportage in English. Then they have also their local website, obviously, if you can read Russian or Ukrainian, etc. And they, for instance, launched the campaign for opening borders of Ukraine with the slogan, working class is not the hostage of politicians. And they are on the same class internationalist and anti-militarist positions as ours. And they, for instance, together with their Russian counterparts, make sense of what was our resuming of an old definition of the First World War, that was revolutionary defeatism. So defeatism was something like a provocation term that say our nation is in war. During the First and the Second War, almost everybody was going into war, so we don't work for our victory as a nation, we work for our defeat, because if all workers in all countries in the world refuse the war and work for the defeat, it is the defeat of the state and of the capital. End of war, because nobody will fight war. So this was the sense of the idea of revolutionary defeatism. That is an expression that it used in the our manifesto. So against the last intervention, thank you also for the information of this California speech. We'll look at it, it's very interesting. So as for the macro policy, it is a good question also because we don't have a macro level as for our reach beyond our commitment to our international association, but we can have ideas and analysis that basically focus on the recovering of different movements that are not state movements, different cultures. So we have for instance, comrades in Latin America supporting the fight of indigenous and Afro-descendant communities that is becoming something very debate on planetary level about decoloniality. So this is something that is quite clearly connected with our logics and with the situations, especially in the south of the world, with some of our comrades are active. And we were just commenting before entering on this story with Trump and Ukraine. So it seems that the war Western propaganda is a bit fading in the last few months because there is already a different balance of force. Because with possibly the the election of Trump, some geopolitical balance will become different, maybe at the expense of Ukraine, maybe at the expense of Taiwan or someone else, but the problem is that at this level, whatever happens is evil for us. So it is absolutely not good either of the two sides of the American elections. So what we have to say in this sense about the war machine is again to be outside. But when you mention this warmongering propaganda, something that is, I think, very macro is challenging this everywhere internationally and through links of solidarity between different countries and different people, because it is the way we can resist this culture. I understand that maybe I didn't respond completely to your question, but it was at least an attempt.
Okay, there was.
I have a question about the general Italian public's opinion about obligatory mobilization or military service. I'm asking this question because the war on this territory ended 30 years ago, and in 2008 the obligatory military service was abolished after 90% of young men had the consciousness objection. So lately the leading party here said that they would like to bring back the obligatory military service in a way that they have a 3-month like military training for everybody. And surprisingly enough, for me at least, surprisingly, they had the internet service with young Croatian people who surprisingly say that they think that military services could be good because it will enhance their discipline, and it's good to be prepared when the war comes. So for me it's very scary because I come from a generation that lived during the war, and I think that 5 years ago it couldn't be imagined that such a generation switch could happen so fast, or maybe I was just living in an illusion. But now I have a feeling that we are so exposed to war and media that young people start again thinking about war as something heroic because they didn't live during the war. They just hear stories about the Croatian veterans who are telling stories about how good actually war was. And basically I get scared that during my lifetime there will be another war on this territory. So I'll repeat just my question from the beginning. Is there a similar situation in Italy?
Anyone else?
Hi, could you please explain the position of your federation against on participation in Kurdish struggle, since the Kurdish struggle has more links with the principles you are saying. It's federalist, it's anti-capitalist, and so on. And there are several of Italian anarchists that been involved in it. And second question, you mentioned the means of how to struggle against militarism. Most of those were direct actions that demand broader organization, class organizing, workers organizing. In the situation that when we don't have such level of organization, do you think that method of boycotting is feasible? For example, recent info said that Israeli economy is having downfall, like 20% of GDP, investments are down, export is down. is it from the anarchist perspective a feasible method to fight against an economy that is supporting war? Thank you.
So about the military service, it is very interesting because clearly in Italy there was a different history in the last 35 years. We didn't have wars like in the former Yugoslavia, but the military mandatory service was only abolished in 2003, so a few years later. I was still of the generation who received their call card for going to the military service, and at the time there were two kinds of objection. We supported both, and they were the conscientious objection and the total objection. So the conscientious objection, that was the easier one, and that I did, was making civil service in something like public services. I worked some months with helping people with disability, etc. So instead of the military service, the other form of objection was the total objection, so it was refusing both military service and civil service on the ground that basically not serving the state, but I think mainly for raising the problem, raising the matter. It was only a small minority who choose this way. Some of our comrades also. I personally chose the easier way, but this was a very important experience also in obtaining then the abolition of that. So it is clear refusing and objecting is always useful, and now we have indeed the same problem. So exactly with the warmongering spirit, let's say, of the last few years, the idea of reintroducing some elements of mandatory service on the same kind of rhetorics that it is useful for forging citizens, etc., etc., was also reintroduced. And I think that this now should be part of a cultural struggle against that. Also because I think that in Croatia it should not be very different, but in Italy the army is increasingly present in the schools. So with uniforms, telling to kids that the army helps people in case of earthquake, disasters, etc. The army is very friendly, the army is very good, etc., etc. So I think that already the task of using all our means, press, demonstration, writing, research, and whatever else to circulate different ideas is really key to that, in hoping then in a mass mobilization. As for the second question, we supported the struggle of the Kurdish people, especially in their fight against Daesh, the Islamic State, but also the Syrian state. What we appreciate of that experience is the idea of confederalism. That is something which means exactly that they don't aim at taking state power. They don't aim at reconstructing a state like former states. Then it is not an uncritical support. We may criticize some of the features that this movement took. For instance, some cult of personality of the leader, Öcalan, and let's say some easy alliances with a lot of different geopolitical actors, including the Western power. Okay, so it is not an uncritical support, but it is something that we believe is one of the most interesting experiences now on the ground. Also for their idea also of intersecting the matter of class with the matter of gender, the matter of environment, the matter of a different organization of territory. So it is clearly something interesting, as for instance on the other side of the world, the Neo-Zapatista movement always was. Even though there may be critics of several kinds to this movement. Anyway, it is a movement from below which doesn't aim to take state power. So this is very important for us. On the discourse of commercial boycott, yes, we joined several times this kind of boycott. We think that in some cases it can be useful to make pressure. It is something that can be relatively easily manageable by most people. Clearly, we think it is not enough, and what should accompany this work is also a great work of conscientization. So making all this step with the consciousness of going ahead, not only with making a pressure on one government in one situation, but for a broader agenda of social liberation, social transformation.
I would like to add maybe something, because while we're mentioning the Kurdish struggle for their thing, I mean, maybe that could be a good example also for, I mean, it's still always, nobody can tell to the people living there what to do, but it's probably a good example of what an oppressed people, because the Kurdish people is known for not having any state anywhere, though living there. So if we have in Palestine a situation without Palestinians without having a de facto state, so basically what makes sense probably for them to do is probably to take an approach similar to what the Kurds are doing, to basically federalize with other ethnic groups that are oppressed there, because Israel, let's be honest about it, it is apartheid state, so it's not just the Palestinian Muslims that are oppressed there, and so they should probably organize with all the other ethnic groups there and try to not take up state power, but instead to tear down the state power that is oppressing them, like the Kurds are trying to do. At least it's part of the Kurds that the anarchist movement is supporting. Okay. No? Okay.
Thank you. I'm very interested to know what is your organization, Federation, which is obviously anarchist in nature. what is your position in cooperating with other groups which are not, such as Marxist, Marxist-Leninists, or, God forbid, liberal organizations? And what is your position on that? That's it.
Do you believe that anarchist revolution could be achieved through pacifist means, via strikes, demonstrations, or protests, for example, rather than violent means which have been used in, for example, Zapatistas, the Rojava, and the Catalan Republic?
Okay, so as for the relations with other groups, in principle, we are open to any kind of collaboration at the condition that they are not political parties trying to take electoral advantage or material advantage with this collaboration, and that it is on single events such as a demonstration, such as a conference, that are a minimum coherent with our ideas. So other grassroots movements from below, various groups, etc. And then we have also a quite fundamental autonomy of local groups. So in each city, in each town, in each situation, groups are free to choose to collaborate with others. The only fixed point anyway is that they are never permanent mergers. So the collaboration with other groups occur on the basis of each time. But in principle, the very idea of having organized group also serves to have a ground to can also collaborate with others, marking a presence, so without, working for others, so working for advancing our ideas, when possible, together with others, only a pleasure. So, about the idea of the anarchist revolt, I think that we already discussed a bit of the matter with violence. So there were situations in history that implied the use of violence, the revolution in Spain. We mentioned Rojava, Zapatistas, etc., the anti-fascist resistance. So we always come back to the definition of Malatesta. So violence is something evil in itself, but it may be needed if you have, in the case of Spain, 1936, to organize resistance against the fascist coup. So this is something that is in some cases unavoidable, but at the condition that it maintains for us the coherence between means and ends. So that resistance is something that is done by people outside state structures, outside government, outside armies, and in ways that, and here we are to the very anarchist concept of revolution, in way that should be oppressed people to decide. We are not what, for instance, the Leninists pretend to be, like a vanguard party. We don't pretend to lead the masses. We pretend maybe to inspire, to suggest something, but not to lead. It is also for that there are historical cases of anarchist realization, but I would not propose a unique model of anarchist revolution, because revolution is revolution. Revolution is something that occurs independently from, often from political organizations and for political leadership. The historical task of anarchists in Malatestian mindset has been to be in these movements to gain the maximum of freedom and of keeping things in the hand of the people directly participating, so outside the hands of politicians and new or old elites exploiting the revolutions and determining authoritarian degenerations, as it was the case with the Russian Revolution, or plenty of historical cases of that. So this is basically the principle.
Yeah, I think this is also connected to the question before that I guess we forgot about it, about the technical position of the revolution today. So like someone asked that it's probably impossible to carry out the revolution as it was done in Spain 36 or as a partisan struggle during the Second World War because we are fighting drones nowadays. But and that's also I'd say one of the reasons why we cannot just copy a revolution from some place or time before some other place or some other time to do the next thing, because every place and time has its own reasons for fighting to start with, and then also the conditions in which the struggle is created and it starts. On the other hand, there are people, not just in the anarchist movement, but also elsewhere, who are rather versatile with the technology. So, I don't know, maybe there actually are technical means to take down a drone. But yes, I mean, we're not here to discuss details. Okay, there's a question.
Thank you for your patience with our questions. I want to go back to the ways of supporting Palestinian resistance, because I have a big problem with supporting them just as refugees or deserters. I think it plays exactly into what the Israeli state wants. They obviously cannot ethnically cleanse 2 million people, or maybe it's just what we think, but hopefully that will stop as soon as possible. So they want refugees, and they want, for 75 years they did that. They made Palestinians refugees, and they kept them in perpetual state of being refugees. And it is not only Israel, it is America, it is Western powers, it is all the countries that could have, also Arab countries, all countries that could have played some sort of pressure. So to be a deserter and to be a refugee, it is exactly what Israel wants. And one of the strategies they want right now is to push Palestinians into from Rafah into Egypt, into Sinai. So I don't know. I think I have a big problem with only supporting that, because obviously it's not a solution for Palestinian people.
Before I say anything, before I ask the question, I would just like to say that there actually is an anarchist group in Palestine, which is Fauda, which is active, and if we're going to support anybody in Palestine, it is of my opinion that we should support the people that are anarchists and the people which seek to dismantle both Israel and the Palestinian Authority currently active, and which is also oppressing the people of Palestine. As of the question, you said that obviously we cannot copy all the revolutions in today's context. We have a very different context for organizing and technology and so on. But for example, when we talk about anti-militarism, we often talk about very, I'd say, tactics that are that have been used for over 150 years, such as general strikes, boycotts, and protests, which I think, were developed 100 years ago when anarcho-syndicalism was also developed in Italy and Spain and America and Germany and everywhere else. But we have to consider that people back then were way less alienated, and you could the building of a mass movement obviously looked much different. Today, a person is very alienated due to technology. We have a lot of problems with mental health, and people being alienated to the point that they don't really participate in a mass movement or don't wish to participate in a mass movement. So does for example, Italian Anarchist Federation have an idea or a project how to address that, or to seek a new mode of organization which could address that? And does it have some project or idea in mind how to, for example, be more, I'd say, proactive? Because usually when we talk about anti-militarism, it's a usually very reactive phenomenon. There is a war happening, and we organize a general strike, we organize a protest, we write articles, we talk about it, we held events such as this, which I, of course, consider very helpful and very good. But I wish that there was actually I'd say, more proactive force behind all of this, in which we could address things such as this before they actually happen. But that circles back to the question before, which deals with alienation of people today. And I'd say a need for a new mode of organization, which is based on today's reality.
As for, a solution for Palestinian people, so first, as I said, we don't tell people what they should do, and we respect what the interested people do. As for what could be our solution, maybe the comrade on your side, quoting that group, already indicated what is the kind of solution that we may envisage from our standpoint, beyond what is protest against sending weapons to Israel, boycott, etc., in all situations. But just a remark on objectors. Israel punishes very severely their objectors. So the idea of objection is that everybody should object the war, not only one side. And we supported, when it was active in past year, this network of Israeli deserters. Then there was a question for Franko, I think, as for the Federation, the idea of being proactive. It was exactly the idea that we had in constituting the anti-militarist assembly. then you may say, with the limits of what is clearly a social minority movement, working in some situations, so with these instruments such as general strike, demonstration, etc. But the idea that we started something that gathered people and in some case anticipated the events of the last couple of years, it would have been very better not to anticipate anything and not to have war, etc., is maybe a little step in this sense. And then we really look after having the help of ideas and practices of everybody, including from Croatia in this endeavor that is international. Then there was a question for you.
If I understood it correctly, the question was actually for you, but he was referring to what I said because he was saying that there are people who feel like alienated because of the lot of distraction from technology, and with a lot of mental health issues causing etc. So if there are because you already have like a structured organization as a big federation, so do you have any means to address that? I mean, it is big compared to what we have in Croatia.
So you meant how addressing these kind of matters also as a political organization? It is a difficult question. The only point I can raise is about sociability. So sociability means that where we have groups, we try to open also locals to have public events that are and also sociability events when the space allow that may be dinners, concerts, theater, etc., which are open to people who are not members of the group but sympathize, come to drink something, etc. Okay, it may look very basic and a bit banal as a solution, but making people talk to each other, making people have social contacts, etc., is a first step at the level that we can manage. Then maybe we may develop more theoretical or sociological discourses, but I don't know. We can also try.
This socializing or organizing parties, not political parties, but parties like fun, could be interesting here, I think. But there was also the question or the issue of Fauda in Palestine. Anarchists from Palestine. There are some organized anarchists in Palestine.
Not in the sense of our organization. There are this kind of reality. Do you have contacts with them? Can you tell more on this situation?
About Fauda?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have contacts with Fauda, but there is a very good article on Lipcom, which Black Rose Anarchist Federation from the United States conducted with members of Fauda, in which they explain their basic realities and so on. So I'd recommend everybody to read it. And also I would like to take this opportunity, since I have the mic, to clarify my questions, because I think it was misunderstood. Although I was stuttering very much, so it's kind of my fault. It's not so much that what I was referring to, for example, is people from 100 years ago, when we had the mass movement looked very different, unions looked very different, and the way that people would gather looked very different. For example, if this assembly was held, I think 100 years ago here in Croatia, we would gather for easy 1,000 people, because the way in which people interacted and the way in which media functioned was such that anarchists actually had their own newspapers, which were very influential, and anarchism as an ideology and movement was very influential back then, due to, for example, an average worker not having much access to media besides a newspaper and so on. But today we have a reality in which we have things such as social media, and ideology is very different, in which people construct identities around it, which wasn't the case back 100 years ago, where the average worker would literally just proclaim a strike. There wasn't an identity around it. This is the consequence of the modern liberal society in which we today live in. So I completely agree that we should be sociable and encourage sociability and reach out to people. But the problem is that it's still very hard to gather a big amount of people, especially if we wish to stay true to our anarchist means and ends, and not like have advertisements for mass events and so on, and use corporate tactics. But there's also the problem in that anarchist movements have also, we live in a society in which we internalize a lot of hierarchies in which we live in. For example, me being raised as a, for example, a cis hetero male has had consequences on my behavior and so on, which is very unconscious. I'm not aware of most of it. And that is something that is true for all of us here. And a lot of these hierarchies are present also in anarchist circles, and they are very hard to get rid of. For example, we can organize an event which is supposed to promote sociability, but a lot of the time it can turn into a typical social event in which people that are more charismatic or which have a higher socioeconomic status than the others are the people that are the loudest, and the people who can accumulate more contacts, and the people who can accumulate power, which is also against, of course, our anarchist principles. So that's what I was referring to. This was a problem also 100 years ago, like in the Spanish Revolution. There was, of course, a lot of effort to get rid of many patriarchal things that existed back then. But of course, it was a revolution that lasted 3 years, and it was under attack and in war. And it wasn't like something that could have been done in 3 years. But what I'm trying to say is that I think that these hierarchies, which are present today, are a much larger problem due to the small amount of people that we can gather as anarchists still participating in such hierarchies, which we often can address, but we don't know how to deal with them. And the question is complex, so I don't expect of you to give me a complete answer, of course, and I don't expect that we can today come to an answer for this. But what I was referring to is that we need a new mode of organization to address this, especially due to the alienation in social media and so on. We cannot gather masses in the thousands on like our main squares in our cities, like anarchists used to do 100 years ago. That's just something that is not going to happen due to the way people interact now, and due to how identities are constructed, and due to things that motivate people, and alienation, which is far worse than it was 100 years ago. And I see things such as general strikes and boycotts and other things as good things which can effectively disable the state in functioning, but something that is, for me, very archaic, and something that needs to be refined and needs to be adapted to today's modern reality, especially things such as syndicalism and general strikes, which were far more prevalent before,
and today are not, due to the aforementioned alienation which often comes in the unions also, and anarchist unions also, which, you know, it's something it's something that we need to address if we wish to have a mass movement, and that's what I was referring to being proactive. I see also general strikes and boycotts and such as a reactive force. There is a war happening, and then we organize this, and this. What I would like to see, and I believe that the Italian Federation has activities that it does besides this, which is something that I would consider as proactive. But what I would like to see is something that we do before the war happens, something that we do to actually contribute to the potential anarchist revolution before the war happens, before there are protests on the streets, something that we can do every day, something that anybody can join into, something that can address the aforementioned problems, and something that can lead to a new mode of organization and a mass movement which could actually paralyze the state and contribute to freedom and liberty to all peoples which are oppressed.
Okay, I think that this was not one question, but several questions. So I think, okay, as you say, if I had the solution to get a mass movement, I would be very, very happier than. But I may have for you a reading suggestion on the discourse that you made, very important, on the emerging of charismatic leaderships, of the unconscious hierarchies and biases that we might have. And it is always something of, yes, many years ago, because as you say, this already existed in historical anarchism. It is translated into English, it is online. I don't remember if in Libcom or another similar website, but in any case, the Anarchist Organization of Luigi Fabbri, it is a brochure, because it explains the idea of having an organization based on groups which agree mandates by synthesis, that is consensus, and basically tries to build equality through the mechanisms of the permanent group, is exactly the way to try to counter what happens in informality, that is, you recreate hierarchies because there is someone who is more clever, someone who is more able to speak, someone who has more contacts, someone who has more time, material condition, and so becoming a leader, an effective leader, without being even elected or nominated, etc. In the mechanism of anarchist organization that Fabbri, Malatesta, etc. propose and that we try to follow, the idea is to have a rotation of tasks that is subject to collective control, exactly to not to deny charismatic leadership, because charismatic leaderships exist. There are people who are more listened than others. This exists. What we can do is organizing our groups in a way to balance that tendency. I know that it is only a partial response to your matter, but it is what we traditionally try to do. Another interesting matter is the distinction that you made with syndicalism. So, in our idea, today I mentioned syndicalism a lot of time, because in this moment, for contingent and practical reason, is one of our main praxis, let's say. But as a principle, syndicalism and anarchism are not the same thing. So if anarchists decided to have their own specific organizations, was also to try to overtake the limits of syndicalism, that, as you say, is a reaction to some worsening of condition, and that is not necessarily something that includes all the possibility of what we call revolution in the general sense of social transformation. So syndicalism is basically the class struggle axis. We believe in what in more recent years was called an intersectional logics, so which considers several forms of oppression that can involve class, but also gender, ethnicity, positionality, and all kind of attitudes that can lead a person to be marginalized, to be exploited, and to be oppressed. So the idea was historically that the anarchist organization intervenes where the syndicalism is insufficient, to have a wider idea of social liberation, clearly with the limits of the number, the structure, and whatever. Always trying our best. Now I don't know if...
Yes, I think it's 8 o'clock, probably it's been a long time now, so if there are no more questions or comments, we could just finish this discussion. Yeah, okay, then that's it. Thank you for the attention.
And thanks for the discussion, a lot of questions, a lot of discussion, it was great. Thanks.
Hvala i nadamo se da se vidimo na idućem događaju uskoro.